morning, everybody. Morning, Jan. How are you?
Good morning, Kevin. Thank you. I'm very well. How are yourself?
No, fantastic. Still alive and kicking. So great to have you on this webinar. You're currently still working from home, which is north of Switzerland. And how are things in Switzerland currently?
Well, let's say they are normalizing again. So we had an announcement that from the 6th of June, a lot of activities are again open to the public, such as the swimming pools, or also regrouping up to, I think, 300 persons. Also, if you walk in the streets, so you see that life picks up again, which is positive, but still you feel in some industries that the measure is still applicable. So companies still prefer that their employees work from home, and while you see it's not entirely normal yet, but step by step we are moving in the right direction. So that's positive.
Fantastic. Good to hear. Good to hear things are getting back to normal.
Yes,
whether
absolutely.
It's new normal, we'll see. Jochen, I just wanted to introduce you. You're a consultant at EHL Advisory Services, which is the Ecole hôtelière of Lausanne, the advisory services, the consulting arm of Ecole hôtelière de Lausanne. I'm sure everybody knows about EHL. You know, when you talk about Lausanne, the first thing that comes to mind, besides the general sort of chocolate, is the Ecole hôtelière. So
Yes.
We've got a great topic today, more so given the fact that a lot of countries are opening up slowly but surely. Tourism was the sector that's been impacted severely. And the topic of today, of this morning, is looking at the near future of the hotel industry, especially resort destination and island destination, which obviously this is where I come from, Mauritius, for example, you know, which is one of the island destinations. You know, we're all eager to understand what's happening in other places, but also what might be happening in the near future, and whether we're going to see a change of business model. I'll leave it to you, Jochen. You've got an presentation for the next 10 minutes, I think, and then we've got a Q&A thereafter. Yep. So it's all up to you, Jochen.
Yes, thank you very much, Kevin. And also thank you very much for inviting me, and as well for organizing the webinar. So you made already a great introduction on the team and on myself. So basically we are looking at the current and the near future of the hotel industry, and more specifically for resort destinations and also touristic islands, or exotic islands. So you also made already a flawless introduction of Ecole hôtelière de Lausanne, the famous hotel school. So it's also the oldest hotel school in the world. Yearly, we have several thousand of students that graduate from our programs. We have a lot of nationalities coming from all parts of the world. And myself, I work for EHL Advisory Services, as you have indicated. So maybe very shortly on our organization. So EHL Advisory is the commercial arm of Ecole hôtelière de Lausanne. We are the largest Swiss hospitality consulting firm. So we are active in 3 pillars. The first pillar is education, which is schools for bachelor programs, master programs, and hospitality management, vocational education. Also, we are certifying schools. Second pillar is bespoke trainings on customer excellence. And the third pillar is the pillar in which I work in, and this is the purely consulting in the hospitality industry. Which is the asset management, opportunity studies, feasibility studies, but also here, and to the subject of this webinar, is the destination management. So let's see how we are currently. I think it's very important to know how the situation currently is. Of course, many know that the situation is not good, but what does it mean not good? And therefore, I would like to share this graph with you. So you can see here the hotel reservations of 2020 compared to 2019 in percentage. And you see several areas of the world. below you see also some data, more deeper and deeper granularity. So you see the percentage. And what you can see here are 4 observations. So first observation is a positive one. Let's start with the positive one, is that globally we see an increase again of hotel reservations coming from the deepest point, which was somewhere in March. And we see, in fact, that as good as all countries in the world are picking up again. The second observation is that the pickup is only marginal. So still, if you see at the more successful countries, which is here Taiwan, they are at 85% of the reservations, but in average, we are picking up very, very slowly. If you see the line, it's not a steep line, it's not a V curve. So we are still in very premature phase of normal. A third observation is also the timing. So you see that some Asian countries are already much further evolved as the European countries. Or for example, if you look at the purple line, which is South Africa, so you see there that the effect was somewhere around 9th of March that we see the drop, which was the latest among all the countries. But the same thing is also that the pickup is not there yet, like we had already encountered with other countries. And the last observation is maybe the more interesting one, is that we see big outliers. So for example, if we look at Italy, where we had the complete lockdown, we see that the situation even today is at 8% of the reservations of last year. They are on 30th of May, whereas Germany, they are already at 40%. So we see, in fact, that between those countries, there are a different number of gaps, significant gaps. And let us go to the next slide, and then we can explain a bit more elaborate on those gaps. And this is, of course, of the resort destinations and the islands. So I've taken here a series of islands, and going from Malta up to Sri Lanka. So most are kind of exotic places, which are very suitable for leisure tourism. And what we see, in fact, is that the trend has also started somewhere in March to go downwards, same as the hotels and the other graph. But so far, we are not yet at the same level as the other hotels are. So the best result is Maldives. They are currently at 20% of their reservations, which is still marginal compared to last year. There are a number of factors of them. And one of the main factors is, of course, the international flights. So there's a high correlations between the flights and the fact that people can travel. And the dependency of the islands is, of course, much bigger as, for example, a country which is surrounded by land, like Germany. They have neighboring countries, etc. They can rely on local tourism and local demand. But for example, if you take Fiji or Vanuatu, well, you need to travel by plane. There's long-haul flights often. They depend a lot of international tourism. And that's the reason, in fact, that we see that for those resort destinations, there is not a real pickup yet, unlike what we saw here in the previous slide. So that's important to know. Now, if you look at the impact of the coronavirus on short term for resort destinations and islands, we will see that there is a need to change the business model. And not only the business model, but also give different value proposals to the customer. More concretely, if you think of a resort and a touristic island, you often think on all-in buffets, mass tourism, groups, sport activities, entertainment. And exactly this is quite difficult with the rules that are applied currently of social distance and also the hygiene rules. So this is currently not possible for this kind of tourism. This is also translated in all the departments of the hotel, which is the meeting, events, incentives. So it's not possible to hold any event in the hotel. Also the F&B will be affected. So no buffet, no salad bar is possible. Also for housekeeping, which is more intensive cleaning. The front office, you need to respect the distance. So what we will see, in fact, on short term for the resort destination is that before, where we could serve more en masse, now we have to take more individual care and respect to the regulations that are applied. So that's a kind of different model that we will encounter in short term. As well, the consumer profile is different. So first of all, we have less demand, as we could see in the previous graph. So without international flights, of course, tourists cannot come. And they are very much dependent also on the long distance flight. As well, elderly people who might come maybe in the lower months. So the question is, if elderly people will travel with the risk of the corona business, there will be none. And my segment, there will be none either currently. And what we see also is that, you know, despite the efforts that tourist destinations have, islands have, they are still dependent on external factors. One very significant, again, is the regulations and the flights. So even though that they would like to have guests coming, the question is, will they be able to come? Because if there are no flights, no one will come. So in that sense, we might ask ourselves, what will be our future customer? So, and as already mentioned also, we expect a very slow startup on a very concentrated period. So for example, summer holidays will come, and we expect that people will travel for summer holidays. They have been inside for so long time. And the question here is, in fact, which destinations will have more benefit as others. And here, like an island like Malta, for example, or the Balearic Islands, they have kind of the advantage that they are quite close to the major market, which is Europe. So very likely those islands might encounter a higher occupancy level as, for example, Vanuatu or Fiji Islands, who depend more on long distance travel. But still, on average, the occupancy is expected to be low and to remain low. We know that from different crises that we had before. So for example, I did some study on the effects of the financial crisis, also on 9/11 for the US hotels. And we see that there is a general drop of occupancy levels. So for example, for the luxury industry or the luxury segment more, it's about 25% for the financial crisis, which is quite a lot. And it was in the first 4 months after the financial crisis broke out. As for the economy segment, it's much lower. At the time, it was about 5 to 8%, so it's lower. But still, we are here in a crisis, so we expect a very, very low recovery or slow recovery, which will take probably, some say, 2 years in order to hit again the same level. Now, what is the effect on longer term? And here, it's quite good to know that that the resorts, they have only two possibilities, or either they close now for 2 years and renovate and reopen again, but few will do because at least they need to run operations, or either they adapt themselves to the situation. And many have to adapt. for this period. So we expect that this crisis will be quite disruptive. And what we expect, in fact, is that technology and robotization will accompany the customer more in their journey. So, for example, we have all a mobile. It's perfectly possible to receive already your key card on your mobile, like we have also with the airline companies, to check in already with your mobile, to order room service with your mobile, etc. So we think this is a catalyst for technology this period. Also, investments will be required, meaning that if you want to respect the space between the customer and the social distance, you have to adapt your infrastructure, your restaurant. People must have more space. So those are all requirements needed, and that will remain on a longer term, as well as the retraining of your staff, your safety regulations, hygiene and quality labels. For example, if we look at the global chains currently, they have partnered up with some hygiene companies, like for example, Ecole, etc., in order to offer a kind of label like COVID-free room or whatsoever. So we expect, in fact, that this crisis will be a catalyst that enforces, in fact, these changes. Secondly, we expect also that there will be bailouts. So first of all, what we see as a consultant of EHL Advisory Services, we do quite a lot of studies, market studies, and we see already that the smaller hotels, they squeeze out over time. And this is a moment in time that we expect that this trend will be enforced. And with that there will be a further rise of brands and chains. Why brands and chains? Well, first of all, they have the advantage of the knowledge, but also of the centralization. So they can centralize the reservation department, they can centralize their revenue, they can centralize the HR, etc. So thus, the cost efficiency is much better in chain hotels as independent hotels. We also expect that the future, the further survival is dependent on external factors, such as the flight routes or travel conditions. And this is still unknown. So we don't know what will be the conditions to travel to resort destinations. If, for example, we cannot fill the planes as much as we do now, if the ticket price will rise, and consequently also long distance flight. So there are a lot of questions still to be answered, but well, these external factors will enforce, in fact, the fact that only the fittest will survive the crisis. As well, what we might expect is that people and organizations try to find always ways to survive, which is not different here. Consider that any hotel and any resort destination is a type of asset where you have a space, you have some rooms, you have a swimming pool, you have maybe a beach. And with all this asset or with all your property that you have, you try to make a business model that works. And therefore, you need sometimes to make something new, to make an experience, or to bring more personalization, or to bring extremes to attract the customers. So it's maybe also a moment that new niche products will start to rise. So that's more or less in short what I had as a presentation, Kevin. So what we may expect on the short term and long term for resort destinations and islands, where we stand now. Of course, if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them as good as possible.
Fantastic. I think that was a very good presentation. The good thing is at least we get to understand what's been happening the last 2 months. And also the good news is the pickups in your markets, for example, in Europe, where you can clearly see in places like Germany, Sweden, Other places are picking up slowly but surely, not a V curve recovery, but it's picking up. I guess the big concern is around resort destination, tropical islands like Mauritius, for example, which you've mentioned. The first question I have for you is, what do you think the hotel industry would require to have a significant increase in hotel reservations, for that curve to go up?
Yes, so this was also a question I had prepared separate from the presentations, because it's very important. I think they have to know what drives hotel reservations. And one aspect that drives very much hotel reservation is macroeconomics. The two others I have added is very typical for the situation now, which is the market context and the safety and regulations. But let's focus a bit more on the macroeconomics. In our reports that we make, we see very, very strong correlations between macroeconomics, such as GDP, purchasing power, unemployment rates, and hotel performance. There are studies that show that the relation between GDP and hotel performance is between 0.9 and 1.2. And hence I wanted to show you this graph, where we see, it's a graph from the IMF, an expected drop of GDP, for example, for Italy of 9%. So if we drop 9% on GDP, we might expect at least a 10% drop on hotel occupancy or hotel performance in general. So here we also have the explanation why there are such outliers between the countries. Like Italy, they are still far from the normal reservations, whereas South Korea, they had only a drop expected of 1.2%, which is relatively okay for the situation. So we will expect for South Korea that the situation has not such an impact on the hotel industry as in Italy. The good thing is, although that the forecast of the European Commission expects an increase already next year again, so we have a kind of V recovery. So they expect 6% increase of GDP next year of the Eurozone. And this is kind of also confirmed if we see previous crises such as 9/11 that we had, or for example, the financial crisis or terroristic attacks in general. I had studied a case on the Brussels terroristic attacks in 2015. It took more or less 2 years to be back on the old level. So macroeconomics has really a major impact as a driver on hotel performance. Secondly, as you can see here in the graph, and I already mentioned before, definitely more important for resort destinations, as well some continents more as others, is the flights. So we see, in fact, here in the graph on below of the UNWTO, that for January and February, the tourist arrivals were still okay for most part of the world. So for Europe, it was still positive. For America, Africa, it was still positive. But once we hit March, we had a significant drop of arrivals. And remember also from the graph that I showed before, that only from March on, we had really the decline of hotel demand. So we see, in fact, that the relation between flights and business is very, very, very high. And hence also some destinations, island destinations, are more dependent. Also some continents, so from the 1.4 billion travels worldwide, the biggest chunk is for Europe, like 600 million. So they will have more severe consequences of the flight ban that is currently in place. And last but not least is also the clarity in regulations. So first of all, are people allowed to travel? Where are they allowed to travel? Under what conditions they are allowed to travel? And also the fact that hotels, they depend a lot on ecosystems. So you can't just open a hotel and people will come. You open a hotel because you have some tourist activities nearby. You have some shopping nearby. You have some restaurants nearby. So if all of those parts of the ecosystem can kind of work again, you start to regenerate demand. And here I see a crucial role also for the government to be very clear in the communication and to have also a plan ahead for the recovery. So some countries, they really support the hotel industry with measurements such as technical employment, etc., or even vouchers for locals, etc. So I think the government must realize what they can do to help the industry and really be a push to help functioning the ecosystem again.
Thank you, Jochen. If we look at resort island destinations, resort hotels, etc., what do you think they will have to? I mean, which destinations do you think will eventually win in the short to medium term during, and obviously we are not out of this COVID-19 crisis, which might be with us for quite a while, but which island destination do you think will probably win during and after the crisis?
Yes, that's a very good question, Kevin, and it's important also to see this. So I think success depends a lot of external factors which they cannot control, unfortunately. But what we see with the graphs that have been showed before is that we see those countries that have been already longer back to business as normal.
Would you mind if we can, sorry, Jochen, do you mind if we can go back to that graph that you showed on the island destinations? Yeah, that would be great.
A good idea. So
yeah, perfect.
This is the situation we are currently for the island destinations. But maybe more relevant is the previous slide, because here we see already again the increase. And what we see is in fact those countries that already could cope with the measures and already go back to normal business more or less, such as Asia. They are far ahead with the hotel reservations compared to the others. So I think those countries who can act fast and quick will have a competitive advantage. Loose on that, so during the crisis, it also depends, as earlier mentioned, on the flights and the external factors which come with it. So if there are no flights, again, well, the success is not guaranteed. And after the crisis, I think many opportunities will arise for tourist destinations and islands, definitely for those who have survived the crisis. So first of all, unfortunately, we may expect some bailouts, whereas the demand, if it would remain the same as this level with less supply, so those who will have survived will have an advantage to capture this demand. As well, we will expect some drop of costs. So at this moment in time, many hotels, what they do is make the financial mechanism work, make the financial forecast work, so they cut costs. And this is also what we seen. I saw that in a report, I read that in a report, that each crisis moment, if it was the mid-90s in the US, if it was 9/11, or if it was the financial crisis, leads to a cost-cutting of the staff in the hotels. So for example, for the financial crisis, this was 7 to 10% less staffing costs were during or just after this crisis. So we may expect, in fact, that there will be more efficiencies for the resort destinations. Also, more innovation will come. So let's say that those who are able to survive will become an improved situation on the long term.
That's great. I mean, the good news is Mauritius is COVID-free, so it's been recognized, and also in the Indian Ocean islands, Seychelles as well. So those are good things to hear. I mean, you sort of positive about islands that are that have tackled the crisis pretty well. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a competitive advantage, and as you say, Mauritius is COVID-free. So also Slovenia has declared it, and it's definitely a promotion, of course, to fly again those routes and to welcome the tourists. Absolutely.
And do you think the impact of this COVID crisis will be permanently disruptive for resort destinations?
Yes, I do believe yes. As I already said before, so you have an asset that you have to manage, because as such, a hotel is just real estate or property that you have, and somehow you need to make money out of it. Now we are forced into a situation that we must change. We cannot do others. If you see the figures here for the different destinations, we see, for example, 20% for the Maldives. Let's imagine it would go to 50% or whatsoever. Still, it's not the old situation. So we cannot live with the old situation. So we have to innovate in order to make our business model work again. And that's why I think also that this is the moment that many hotels and many destinations will completely change. I want also to go back for that on my slides in regards to the short-term and the medium or the long-term impact, which I mentioned here. If you see like resort destination, as I said already, it's often about mass tourism. It's groups taking the plane by a tour operator, flying to the destination and enjoy the summer there and to visit some touristic places. The question first is, will this model still be applicable? So we saw, for example, Thomas Cook that went bankrupt. Maybe others will follow due to the crisis. Also, the flight routes might change, that some countries will not fly anymore to some destinations, or either at a higher price. So it's still a question here if we can continue the current business model. But most important, what I esteem is on the short term, we will see a more individual hunt for customers. Like the groups for the moment will be hard to maintain. And I think from the investments that will be done by the different resort hotels in terms of infrastructure, equipment, etc., what we do now, they will maintain afterwards. And because of it, we will probably have a disruptive moment now that will continue for the next era until we maybe have another Black Swan event. Yeah.
And do you think in that scenario, do you see like kind of a price war in the short term?
That's a good question. This price war, still, I think it's not a possibility for many to participate at a price war. So definitely luxury properties, they will have tough times. And this is also shown in previous crises that like luxury properties, they suffer the most in those times. And I think from their cost structure, they cannot go too deep into the price war. So I don't know from the hotel side if that would be the desired scenario. although I see that some have advantage, meanwhile, with the government support. So if there are countries who give more support to tourism in regards, for example, to technical employment, etc., some countries might have extra benefits which others do not have, that they can use in their tourism strategy and offer lower rates. But I don't expect, in fact, a price war, because from a cost point of view, with more individualization, where the employee have to do the extra mile to serve the guest, I think it's a very difficult scenario, and I don't think that it's a plausible scenario.
And as they say, in every crisis, globally, there are opportunities. So do you, I mean, you've mentioned very briefly, but what are the opportunities that you see in the short to long term, yeah, for the hotel industry?
Yes, well, I have been reading articles on it, and well, you see a lot of innovation and ideas that pop up. So, for example, some hotels, they rent their hotels for long stay. They rent their hotels for temporary offices. They rent their hotels to medical staff. So we see already a little change here and the business model. We see also hotels that plan to open, but then with 50% of staff only, so reduced staff, reduced services. We see also a lot of partnerships popping up, partnerships, as I already said, between global chains and to companies which are involved to hygiene, such as Dettol or whatsoever. So for the quality labels, of course, and quality label in regards to hygiene, safety, etc., like going the extra mile. Centralization also, as I spoke about the rise of brands, that more and more hotels will try to group and cluster some activities such as reservations or revenue management, maybe outsource also a part of the staff to be more agile on the short term. So what we see currently is, in fact, that many hotels and resort destinations and islands, they are looking for solutions in order to find a long-term equilibrium. They have not found it yet, because for this long-term equilibrium, you must have a business model that works on a long term. But we see a lot of things trying to happen, and I think it's also positive, because hotel industry is a really traditional industry where you just do it because it has to be done in hotel industry. So this is a moment to try new things as well. Let's take that positive as a positive lesson. And from that aspect, from this moment, I expect much more changes to happen on the short and the longer run, apart from what I mentioned here. Yeah.
Thanks, Jochen. I mean, we're running out of time. I've got so many questions. We can spend another hour or two very easily. My last question for you is, you know, given what you're seeing, given previous crisis elsewhere, you've mentioned about, for example, in Belgium, the terrorism attack 5 years ago. We know, for example, in North Africa, Tunisia, and in Egypt, there's been different crises, etc. What advice would you give, you know, to exotic destinations at this point in time? Yeah.
Yes, that's a very valid question. Thank you for asking, Kevin. So I would have two recommendations at this stage. So first of all, I would say, because business is still so low, so like you see the graph here again, I think it's important to question yourself, will I open or not? This is a financial calculation, a financial forecast that I would recommend to make the numbers work for the next 1, 2, 3 years. So I think, well, first of all, you may question if you should open. And I read recently on the social media from a source that around 90 to 100% of the hotels already open by July. Then I question myself, how will they open? How will they be profitable with only 20-30% of the reservations we have currently compared to last year? So I think this is a very good evaluation you should start with, not to burn your cash. And secondly, I think it's a great moment for resort destinations to make a competitive advantage, So as I said, if they are able to innovate and if they are able to hold for the coming 2 years, I see a very bright future, in fact, 2 to 5 years with a lot of demand and, a new offer. So I would use this time to rethink the business model, to rethink the service offer, to rethink who is my customer. And if they manage well, I'm pretty sure that they will have a bright future on the mid-long term.
That's great to hear, because when you look at the information out there every day, the last 2 months has been so much negativity, but very good to hear. The future is actually bright and even brighter than before, because it's going to make us think outside the box for new customers and how we're going to come up with new products and services, and also how we're going to market ourselves as island destinations. As you know, an island like Mauritius is very much in the hands of tour operators. And today we're talking about digitalization. I've seen in this 2 months how people are super connected. Those who were not connected are even more than before. So that's a great opportunity. Jochen, I would like to thank you for your time. This is the way of you giving back to the hospitality sector, which is great. And very informative, and I think we should be doing another session at some point in time in the next couple of months when things start to pick up, and would love to have your thoughts eventually again, especially about resort destinations like Mauritius, Seychelles, Maldives, and compare with what's happening in your part of the world with Sardinia, Corsica, Malta, Ibiza, etc. So thank you very much, Jochen, and all the best. And let's keep being positive. Hospitality is a great sector and will remain a great sector, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you also very much, Kevin, for your questions and the organization. I really appreciate that I could contribute to it. And yeah, as said, let's remain with the positive messages of this session. And I'm sure that sooner or later, everything will be going very well again.
Thank you. Thanks, Jochen. Thanks, everyone,
Thank
for
you
watching.
very much. Have a good day.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.